Started. All right, friends, welcome. Oops, wrong screen. Welcome to week 2, lecture 2. We're continuing our understanding of React, and we are beginning to start seeing a couple different things, right? A couple different tools that we can do. We've talked about props already, and yesterday we talked about state, which we'll review in a second. Today we're going to talk about a really important portion. It's called forms. Now you guys are probably familiar with forms. If you've done any sort of full stack application, you understand the importance of forms. We're going to talk about that today. Why do we have forms? What do they do? What do they do for us? We're also going to talk about how we're going to write them in JSX, what that's going to do. And then on that, we're going to have to create a synthetic event similar to how we did yesterday to actually handle that form in its particular data. So there's quite a few things we have to do with that. Before we get started, just as always, there's discussion questions for this week are due by 11:59 p.m. Sunday, and then core assignments are due. You've got 3 core assignments due this week. Putting it together, which we talked about yesterday, that's handling state, basically is prop it up with a little bit of a counter for state. So same. You have hook forms and more forms. Hook forms is going to be something we're going to talk about similar to today. Let me log in. Sorry about that. Something similar to this, where we are going to learn all about forms, how we're going to handle that. And then tomorrow, we're going to just keep diving into forms. We're going to handle some more advanced forms and handling that. We're going to do it one way today, and then tomorrow we're going to do it a little bit more of an efficient way, in my opinion, so we can handle that and deal with that information. This is in the functional components section, and it is right after we have putting it together. We've got forms. And so we can talk all about, and we will talk all about this here very soon. Understand what this E is, E prevent default, what's going on here, how we can handle this information, and what we're going to do moving forward. Before we do that, I want to talk just a little bit about what we talked about yesterday, which was use state. Remember, use state is a way that we can keep track of some information that's bound to our component, right? And we saw that even if we created multiple albums and each album had a count, or a movie, not album, sorry, but movie, and it had a count of how many views it was. If I clicked it, it could go up and down, but it was by itself, right? It didn't have any sort of, it didn't impact any of the other movies, right? If we click the view, it was just for that specific one. And so it was a piece of information that was kind of tied to the scope of that component. It is going to be something you're going to use all the time moving forward. We're typically always going to use it. So there's going to be very few moments when we don't use it, or very few assignments, if any. I think all assignments moving forward, you probably will. So if anything is unfamiliar to you with use state and kind of handling state, then I would encourage you guys to make sure that you are familiar with it. Kind of go back, come to office hour, ask some questions, so that way you really do have a great understanding of use state and that hook that we have, or sorry, that synthetic event that we have. Okay, great. Are there any questions on really state or any of the housekeeping that we have? Any questions from you guys? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and create our Vite package. Can anybody remember what is the way that I can do that? How do I create a new Veep project? Vite, not Veep, sorry. Anybody remember? I'm in my project, or I'm in my folder where I want to do that. How do I create a new Veep project? Nobody. None of the 5 people in here? Okay. It's npm create Vite latest. Right? And then here I'm going to talk about forms, or the project. We're talking about forms today, so I'm going to call this forms. It's going to be of type React. Perfect. And then we're going to go down to JavaScript. Great. So now that I've created this, and if I say ls, I see where it's at. I have forms. I'm going to cd into forms. Let's cd to forms. I'm going to run npm I for installing, or I could run npm install. Both of those work great. So my internet's a little bit slow today. So if I do get choppy, please feel free to put that in the chat, and then I can kind of go off my camera if I need to. Okay, so I've done that. I've installed everything. And then lastly, I can just do npm run dev. And when I run npm run dev, it takes me here to this local host, and I go and do that. Great. So we have our project. What I want to do is let's go ahead and go into my forms, and we're going to build out a form. But first, let's go ahead and get rid of some of all this stuff, kind of all this pre-made stuff. Let's get rid of that. Great, cool. And so now I've just got this empty app, and I want to go ahead and create a form. Now, I am a person who likes to sort of abstract everything. Now, I don't like to have what we call a monolithic code base where just kind of everything's written in one place. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and create a component for our form. So let's do that, right? So I go to my source and I say components. Within my components, I'm going to create a form.jsx. Remember, it's capital. I'm creating that, and then I say refce. That is my shortcut, and then now I have got a form here. Great, perfect. I've got my form. I'm importing React from React. I've got my form. We are all good to go here. Cool. Well, let's say, let's just go ahead and create any sort of form. Can anybody tell me, just from a very basic perspective, what do we need if we want to create a form? What are some of the keywords, or what are some of the attributes that we need in order to have a form? Some of the main functionality of a form. Let's say we wanted to make a movie. How would I do that? Where we have a movie title, a release year. Yeah, exactly. We got form, we have labels, we have inputs, we have types. Exactly. Great job, guys. So first and foremost, I need this form. Now, for you guys might have seen something like this that's like method post action. We don't need to do that for React. We can just say form. And then within my form, I'm going to have a couple different things. Now I'm going to say input. Let's do of type input of type text. And then we're going to call this title. And above that, I'm going to have a label, HTML for title, and we're going to say movie title. Perfect. Then we're going to have another label that's going to be for year. I think we had. Yeah. We'll say year, and we'll say release year. And then we have an input of type number. Perfect. And then I'm going to have one more label. And this is going to be for views. I'm going to say total views. That makes sense. Perfect. And we're going to have an input. It's going to be of type number. Perfect. And then lastly, I want a button. That can be type submit, but by default, a button is submit. So if you just had button, it's same. We could say add movie. Perfect. Okay. So there's a couple things that we want to do here. And let's start from the jump. If I want to have some sort of information, I want to keep track of the movie. Let's say that I want my application, or I want this component to have a form, and then when I type it, and I submit it, I want to then, I just want it right below that. What are some things that I'll need in order to do that? If I want to show the information that I type into my form, what am I going to need to do? Maybe a div, then use those with the attributes in it. Yeah, exactly. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say a div. I'm going to have a p tag. Let's do h2, and we'll say movie title. So, Brittany, what you stated is kind of what I was wanting somebody to bring up is, oh my gosh, I cannot spell title. Title. If I'm going to have some curly boys in here, what is that insinuating I'm going to have? Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have some use state, right? Not inherently props, like we can do that if we wanted to, but we're definitely going to have some use state. Cool. So let's bring in use state up here, comma, curly bracket, use state. Okay, great. And so I know that I'm going to need some information. Now, there's two ways I could do this. I'm going to show you state separated out individually today. So, and kind of everything individually handled today, just so that way we have an understanding of forms and how we can do that. Tomorrow, what we're doing is we're going to package it all together so that we can just do it really in one piece of state in one function. But today we're going to do it in a different way. What we're going to say is we're going to say const, and I know that I'm going to have title, set title, and we're going to set it, let's just set it to nothing, right? We don't want it to start with anything, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to have year, set year, and I'm going to have views, set views. Perfect. Great. Now that that is handled, right? This is my total views, my total, I have all my information. Here, I can put whatever is in state. So I'm going to say title, which at the beginning is going to be nothing, year, and we're going to say views. Okay. So now let's go ahead and take a look at this. I don't have form in here, so let's do that. Let's put in my form. We made sure it got brought in from my components. Awesome. Let's get rid of that. We don't need it for right now. Perfect. Okay. So we have my form. What is this giving me? A fragment with only one child is redundant. Okay. That's fine. So we have our form. Let's see what it looks like. We come here, we refresh. Not seeing anything.
I think you might need to get rid of line 5 because we're not importing use state.
Yeah, good call. Okay, thank you, Garrett. Okay, so we have just a very basic form. Now, I don't love the way this looks, but for right now, we're just trying to handle this. Anybody tell me, why is a form important? Why do we use forms? We use forms all throughout development, but why do we do that? Why are they important? Anybody tell me? To get an input? Yeah, that's a great idea. To collect user data to help make accounts, they allow user input. Exactly, all of those are correct, right? Forms are a way that we communicate or interact with our user, right? And specifically, it's a way that we can get data from our user, whether they fill that out and they put their name, their email, their password, whatever that is. And data is really, really, really powerful, right? Whether if you're Google or Facebook, and if somebody fills out a form to create a Facebook profile, it allows you to start collecting data, and then you can start selling their data and you make a ton of money that way. Right, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do with forms, but really it's a way that we can communicate with our user and get some information from our user. And so that's kind of the foundation of a form uh, of forms in kind of why we use them. And they're used in every language, obviously, because it's a way that, again, we can get some information and interaction with our user. Okay, so now that we've created our form, we see here on the platform, we're going to use an onSubmit. Now, an onSubmit is similar to this, similar to how we had our onChange or our onClick yesterday, right? Here, we're going to do an onSubmit. And notice that this is an event that runs when a form is submitted. So onSubmit is our synthetic event that we're going to use that whenever a form is submitted, we're telling our form, this is what I want you to do. So the way that we do this is we go to our form. And instead of action here, we don't need that. We can just say onSubmit. And we say, well, whatever it's submitted, this is what I want you to do. Now, let's say we're going to create movie. Great. We want it to create a movie. We haven't created that functionality yet, right? So because I did it this way, that's insinuating that there's some information or some function that I'm calling, but I don't quite have that yet, right? So let's do exactly that. Let's do exactly that. Let's create that functionality. What I want to do is I'm going to say const, and this is handling my submit, create movie. Now, when we are dealing with submissions and synthetic events, we actually have an event that we will often call, you can call it event, or you might call it E. It's usually called E. And when this is happening, there's some, as it's a synthetic event, there's some information that JavaScript passes over to us. So before we do anything, all I want to do is I want to console.log, oops, E, just so we can see what is being passed through. So if I come here, nope, not that. Yep. Let's come here. Let's say Walter MIDI. It's 2012, and total views is 300. Cool. Add movie. Great. Nothing broke. So that tells me that we were able to pass something through, but let's go check our console. Nothing happened. Let's try it again. Okay. So it happened very quickly, and you can't really tell. But what happened was what we call a synthetic event. I think this is refreshing. So it's our actual event that's happening. There's something we need to do before, and you see, right, that we tried to console log and it instantly happened and then refreshed and went away, right? So when we're dealing with events, we have to make sure that we don't have it rewrite or refresh itself like we just witnessed. So we do this thing called an e.prevent default. This is saying, hey, for my event, I don't need you to refresh because I want to grab that information and handle it in some way. This E comes from whatever you called this right here. Like if you called this event, this would be event.prevent default. So now I come here and I say, okay, refresh. We're good. We say Walter MIDI. I say, this, add movie. Now you can see we actually get to have our event, right? This e.prevent default is a built-in function that'll say, okay, wait, I need some information, and it doesn't constantly refresh. Remember, React works with a virtual DOM to where it's always trying to make sure that it matches the real DOM. And so what this does is allows us that when we receive an event, we can actually look at it, handle it, do whatever we need to do with that. And there's a whole bunch of information that you can get here. Really, one of them is going to be our target. So e.target. And you can see that we have a couple different things. e.target.value can look at some information like Walter MIDI, but there's a ton of information here, right? Events will pass in a whole bunch of stuff. Perfect. Here we see this is the value passed in this way. And lastly, it's going to be, we've got another input in a button, right? So we have all those values, but this event that passes through, we can get a whole bunch of stuff from it. We can get a whole bunch of stuff from it. Now, I first want to do a few things regarding my state, right? Because if I wanted to, and this is what we'll do similar to tomorrow, is actually go into that event and grab some information. But for right now, what I want to do is I actually want to grab my title, my release here, and my total views from my form, right? And there's a different way that we can do this. So if we go back to our code, and we have our states. We've already established these states right here. So we've seen that on submit, we run this create movie, and this create movie handles my e.prevent default, right? It handles that. Now there's another event or synthetic event that we can use, and we're going to use that's going to update our state here. Update our state here. Does anybody happen to know, has anybody worked ahead and seen what we're going to do, or have any idea of what we're going to do? If we're looking at these synthetic events, what might we do for whenever we're typing something into my form? What is a synthetic event that I might use? Yeah, exactly, phone. It's on change. On change. Yeah, exactly, Johnny. We're going to use on change to save our state variable. So how do I do that? Well, on my actual input itself, I just say on change, and then I say exactly what I want it to do. Now, again, I'm a fan of abstracting things. So I'm going to say something like handle movie or handle title. Here, I'm going to say on change equals, I'm going to say handle year. And then lastly, I will have another input that says on change handle views. Cool. So what this event's going to do is it's going to have this information here, and we'll look at it. And we're going to have access to whatever is changed within this specific input, similar to the way yesterday when we changed state to that specific component. On change is going to handle that specific input. So let's go up and do that. Let's go up and grab that information. So I'm going to do this first one. Say const handle title. Now it's still an event, so I'm going to call this E, right? And again, let's look at, I want to look at this event. So let's just console.log E. Let's see if we have to do this e.prevent default or if that is just on submission itself. So I go to my code. I think I logged out of that somehow. Not sure how. Okay. Is my server stop running? Inspect. See what's going on. Trying to see if I have a. I'm wondering if it's because I'm calling those functions that aren't there yet.
Yeah, like the, okay, you got the handle title.
Yeah. So what was happening was it's because I hadn't created. So let's just create because I had this handle year and handle views, but there was nothing there. It wasn't running, right? So I'm just gonna const handle year and just leave this yeah, we can console log E, and then we'll do const handle views. Perfect. Okay, now it should work, and I can undo those. What was happening is because I was calling these functions that didn't exist, it was breaking, therefore it wouldn't run. Exactly, Brittany, you put that in the chat. Great job. That's exactly what was going on. Okay, so now we come back and let's see what happens on an event whenever I change. So if I go to console, handle year is not defined, let's refresh. Okay, we're good now. If I go to movie and I type Walter, I just type W and you see that I got a synthetic event, right? I've got some input. I had a value of W, right? I had some event that was type change and it was on change. This event happened. So because of that, because I'm using these synthetic events, obviously we take in E because we want to have access to that event. Now, in this, there's a whole bunch of information, but notice that I see this target right here, right? And this is what I'm trying to capture, is when somebody types in Walter, we can see there's a whole bunch of synthetic events because every single letter that happens, it adds in, but I want this information. I want this target, and within this target, I want this value, right? And so what I can do is if I console log e dot target, now I get something a little bit different. If I refresh this and I say Walter, you can see that I get, this is my target. It's specifically this input right here. And then if I want whatever is inside of this input, which we just saw, it's this dot value. This is what we call using dot notation. So we're going into, further into the different keys within my object that's given. So if I do this e.target.value and I refresh, and I say W, oops, W A L T E R. And you can see that React follows along with me, and every single time there's a change, there is an event that happens. And so what I can do, because this is so fast, right? And it's okay if we continue to do this, is how would I update my state to grab this information? How would I do that? So I've console logged it. That's great. What do you guys think? What could I do? Yeah, exactly, Brittany. I could use this set title to e.target.value, right? Because that's exactly the information I want to have. And so now if I come here and I refresh and I type Walter, I still get all those events. But if I go to this components and I go to my form, you see that I have this state here of Walter. I have those other states because I've predefined them as empty strings. So there are states there. But this is a way that I can actually set my title, right? So now I can grab information. I can handle that. Cool. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to go here. I'll just get rid of this. I'm going to do set year, where I'm saying e.target.value. And then lastly, I'm going to say set views, e.target.value. Perfect. Cool. So now I have some sort of information, right? Where I have my title, I have my my set, I have my title, my year, and my views. So if I come here and I refresh, and I type Walter 1, 2, 3, 4, we can see that it is constantly updating my state. And if I change this, there's an event because it's changed. And so if I have a whole bunch more views, all of a sudden my state is going to change. So we have handled when there's a change, what we do with our state. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions? Are there any questions on what we're doing? Just put a 1 in the chat if this all makes sense. Put a 0 if it does not. Okay. So for what your assignment looks like, we go to your assignment, the hook form. Let's see exactly what it's wanting us to do. So create a form like the following wireframe with a single React component called form, which is what we just did, and hooks. Then show in real time the data that's being inputted in the form below. This is not required to match CSS to complete this assignment. So if we want to show real time, that's just the only portion that we haven't completed yet, right? We have those values. What could I do? I guess we actually have completed that because, sorry, we already have our getters, title, year, views. So as we come here, if I say Walter, you can see as I change in real time, this changes. If I add 3, if I add more numbers, this will change. So this is everything you need to do for your assignment. Now, normally what we will do is we will handle some sort of create movie. What we're going to talk about kind of moving forward is what do we do after? So right now, just for hook forms, all you have to do is show it in real time. But if we look at more forms, let's see, we'll have some sort of validations. We'll have some sort of validations. That's what we're talking about tomorrow is validations. So that way we can say, hey, if this happens, then let's go ahead and say that those characters, but just from a high level, what do you guys think we could do in regards of validations? Like where would we put that information? In the handlers. Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a really good idea. What I'm actually going to do is because we're already pretty ahead, right? Like we've already kind of talked about some of the main things. So this is one way you could do this, right? This is one way that you can handle this and everything's abstracted. I'm actually going to show you a second way to do this. So that way you can see the 2 different versions. I'm going to create another component. And I'm going to show you what it looks like instead of having each handler separated out. I'm going to show you what it looks like to have everything in one. And then it gets to a little bit of fun. But then then we can build off of that so we can do validations tomorrow. So that way we're a little bit ahead too. Unless there's any questions here on what we initially are talking about. Cool. From a high level, what I also want to communicate is this allows us to update the data, right? So you might be asking yourself, well, why do we do create movie? Well, as we start dealing with validations, as we start dealing with data, sure, it doesn't matter if our state gets updated. If we're actually going to send something to the database, we're probably going to have some sort of validation, some sort of way to assure that the data is good, right? It's not an empty string. It's not, if I say number or if it's supposed to be a number and they put something weird, if it's a release year and they put 2080, we know that hasn't happened yet, right? So what create movie and what this on submit event's going to do is it's going to be kind of my stopgap before I actually submit the data to my database, before I take that and do something with it. I can check and see, okay, so is this good data? Does it pass my validations? Does it pass the rules that I've set so that we know, okay, we are good to go? These handlers don't really mean anything, right? Even a person that has corrupt data, sure, our events change and our state changes, but if we're not submitting it to a database, it really doesn't matter, right? It's just kind of temporary information. Okay. So I'm gonna create another form. I'm gonna call this form 2.jsx. And so let's do REFCE. Great. I'm gonna create a form. Say form. And say label times 2 input times R3. Perfect. Ooh, that's too much. Messed up. So I was trying to do a shortcut. Do this. I guess I could have just gone to this one, right? This is probably a little bit easier. Cool. Come here, this is way easier. Okay. So we have our unsubmit, we have our create movie, our handle, our kind of handling everything. Now I do want to create some sort of state. So, and I'm gonna put this is a way to have less handlers and less state. Cool. So instead of having it, what we have, and I'll put this sort of side by side actually, instead of having it this way, where I'm going to have my state broken out individually, I'm actually going to create a state object. So I'm going to say const movie. Oops. Movie, set movie. And my state, remember, state can be anything, but it's going to be, it's an object, and it's going to have a key of title, a key of year, and a key of views. So this, instead of having it as, you know, a title, a year, and views, everything individualized, I can just create one piece of state and say use state, and it's going to be an object, a movie object. And then it has some information, my title, my year, and my views. And these are set by default. So if I looked at my pieces of state, I would still, I can still keep track of those pieces of information. Cool. This is a little bit easier for us. Now, when we had it here, and we had these all broken out, we had individual handlers, which is fine, right? Because it makes it nice, because what I can do is I can just say handle views, and I know that that specific on change is going to just change for my views, right? But we changed it a little bit, right? I need to now handle movie, but it works in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to say const handle movie that is going to take in an event. Oh my gosh. Takes in an event. Thank you. Now I can put just E here, so I don't need to put the other one. And so before I type, and it's going to come, I need to do set movie, right? But I want to make sure, or how would I know whenever something's changing and if I'm running the same on change function each time, I need to know how to keep track of, well, what am I actually changing, right? So there's a little bit of a fun way that we can do this. I can say set movie. Remember, I'm running it as a function, and then I'm going to give it an object. Now, this same handler is going to handle every single one of my inputs, right? And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to overwrite any of the information. So here is where I use my spread operator, and I say grab everything you currently have of movie. So it's going to spread it out, right? So if let's say I have already filled out title, I've already filled out years, and then now I'm on views, and views, the views input is calling this. Well, I'm going to spread this out and I'm still going to have this information here. I'm going to be able to keep track of that. What I'm also saying is, hey, where the comma, I'm going to say the target, e dot target dot name. Now that target that we showed, I showed you value, but there was also another name. And what's really important is what you name it here needs to match what's up here, right? Because it's going to say, hey, that target's name, and it's going to say, okay, great. So it knows that, oh, whenever I run this, if I'm saying handle movie, right? And I see that the input that called this function is its name, it's e.target. Remember that gave us this entire portion, and then dot name. If that matches this, well, then I want to change that. And what do I want to change it to? I want to change it to e.target.value. Let me move this over just a little bit so you can see. Cool. I'm going to pause here. Let's walk through this one more time. Handle movie. Perfect. So what's happening is instead of, it's a great question, Johnny, and I'll get to that in just a second. Instead of us putting everything separate like this, which is fine, but if you have a form, let's say that had 20 inputs, you could see how state could get really kind of hard to manage, right? Here we put state in just one object. Both of these work. So if you did either of these, like moving forward, that's a-okay. Like whatever makes the most sense to you. But because we put everything in an object, what was nice about this is anytime this changed, oh, we know, okay, we're just handling views because that's handle views. So we're just charging set views to the value. What we have to do, because this is an object, is we have to say, well, what is calling this? Which kind of input is calling this? Right? So I already have an error because I have an issue. So I've got this name. I need this as year. I need this to have a name of views. Perfect. Okay. So when this runs, it is going to grab my movie object. So what is currently there, what has already been affected, right? Then it's going to, and Johnny asked a great question, why are there brackets around here? Well, remember, if I would have just said something like this, like console.log, and I said movie bracket title, that's just me getting the key of title, right? And then I would get that value. This is just saying the bracket here is just getting the key. And so it's saying, hey, my key of whatever the target name is, in this case, title, I want to set it to whatever the value is here. So whatever we change it to. So all this bracket is doing is it's identifying, hey, at this key, I want to set movie and add it. Now, one thing to remember with objects, when you have an object, right? Because this is going to grab everything. So there might even be, remember how every time we did like Walter and his WALTER, and we had an event every time, it's going to spread out what was currently there. And so the way that JavaScript works and the way that objects works is, remember, if I call the key name, it's going to look and say, do I have this key? Yes, I do. Well, what do? I set it to this value. What I sometimes see students do, and remember that when an object looks, if it doesn't find the key that you are calling, it will just create one. So let's say that I had something like this, and I had a misspelling. It's going to spread out my title, so it's still going to have title. It's because it's going to spread all this out. but it's going to go to the target name within my object of title, but with a misspelling. It's not going to find that. So then it's going to create a new key with this specific spelling. So if you ever find yourself, if you do kind of move with this one, with this option, which is totally up to you, if you find yourself being like, why is it not showing title? Go in, and this is where the developer tools really come in handy, and say, okay, well, what are my components? What do I have in here? What is my state? Because if I change it, or if I have something spelled incorrectly, you'll see that you have maybe a fourth state. And you're like, wait, I'm supposed to only have three. Ah, okay. It's because I misspelled it, right? And you can kind of problem solve that way. Cool. So now that we've done it this way, it'll work the exact same, right? I've got a button, I've got a movie, and now every time this changes, we go and we console log. This is just, we can kind of comment that out. But we go and we set our movie, we grab all of our current information, we add or update any of our new information or whatever's calling this, and then we add its value there. So if I were to go here and say form 2, form 2, perfect. And above this, I'm just going to say just so we can see. Perfect. So now if I come here, I've got an issue. Oh, anybody see my issue? Anybody know what my issue is? What would my issue be? Nothing's showing up. If I go here and I inspect, look at my console, use state is not defined. Okay. So let's go and define use state. That's correct. I'm using state, but I haven't brought it in. Use state. Perfect. Come back. Ah, nothing's still showing up. Ah, create movie is not defined. Remember, I pulled in my form, I just copy and pasted. So I have this create movie here, but I don't have a create movie. So let's just const create movie. It's an event. You got prevent default. That's fine. Perfect. Now we're good. Let's come back. Ah, now I have everything is showing and good to go. Cool. So I want to show you that whenever I come here and I go to my components, I've got form. And if I say Walter MIDI, I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cool. That works. We've updated our state every time we have an event, and that happens. In the same way, if I go to form 2 and I say Walter, now it looks a little bit different, right? My state has this. It's got title, year, views. And this is really where you need to check and see. Like if I were to do something like this, again, remember I did this. My input's name is title. And I were to refresh, and I say Walter. Now you see I actually have 4 different keys here, title and title with 2 L's. So you have to make sure that your input name, if you do it this way, matches your state object and its keys. So it's a really, really, really important thing to note. But now, just to show you that it updates the same way, right? I say Walter MIDI. It knows, okay, it's specifically that one that I'm updating. If I say year, 1, 2, 3, and if I say views, all of them, it still works the same way. It still operates the same way. It's just 2 different ways to do it. I like to do it this way. For me, because what this does is instead of having, you can see 3 lines of state, 3 different handle views, and a create movie, I just have one piece of state that I'm manipulating, one handle, and a create movie. Now let's say that my form had 5 or 10 inputs. First name, last name, email, password, age, favorite food, favorite color, birthplace. If I have all those different pieces of state, I've got to have a different handle for each way. Whereas if I just put this in one state object, I can manipulate it this way as well. All right, I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on what we've just talked about?
Can you scroll down so we could see the bottom of form 2?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to see what the input should look like.
Yeah, so the input, the real things you have to have is its type, right? Name, and again, this name is what we're calling right here. So it's just this is this. This is my target. Like if I were to just do console.log e.target, we'll see when I run this, let's say Walter, cool, or Walt, I go to my console, we can see that this is my target, right? And then I say dot name, and I have that information right there. So it's really important. And then you don't have to have an ID. It's not necessary. You don't need to have that for right now. And then just your on change. What do you guys think? What do you think is easier to understand, and what do you think is easier to use? Just kind of first glances, first kind of glimpses of forms. Does anybody have a preference? Form 1, so I'm getting Form 1 is easier to understand, Form 2 more practical to use. Yeah, exactly. Right. Form 1 is a little bit more laid out, and so as you guys are first building, feel free to do it this way. Again, it's going to work just fine. But if you want to put it in an object, which is typically how I like to handle it, this is just I told you guys that I would show you both ways, and so I just wanted to make sure that you guys had access to both of these.
It kind of feels like when you separate your state out into these different strings, like you had the first example, it makes it more like on first glance clear and legible, but creating the object form of it just seems more concise, packaging it together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think it's sort of might seem moot at the beginning, but if you have 5, 10, and then the other thing is you might have a form, but you might have other pieces of state that you're managing. And so I've seen sort of horror code that has maybe 5 to, or sorry, like literally 20 pieces of state. And so you're trying to manage your state and handle it, and it gets really, really confusing. Whereas I like to have it sort of coupled and say, no, I know that this piece of state, or all of these pieces of state have to do with movie. That's what I'm dealing with.
Definitely.
But one thing to know is, so if I were to say H1, and I'm going to say movie title, one thing we have to do is I would then say movie dot title. Right, I have to go into my movie and say movie dot. Because remember, I can't just say movie, because movie is an object itself. So if I want to show specific information, I have to go into my object, and I can use dot notation and grab that key. Like movie dot title, movie dot whatever. Let's see. I wonder if it'll work with bracket. I think so. Let's see. Yep. Yeah. You can do bracket or dot notation. Dot notation is probably more popular, to be frank. If I just say movie, You see we get an error. Because you found an object and it's like, I don't know how to show just an object. Right? That's when we have to start saying movie dot and then its name. Then we're good to go. Are there any questions on this, on forms, our sort of first level of forms, first beginning portion of forms? Any questions here? Okay. Tomorrow, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through forms again. We're going to get some more practice, but we're actually going to be showing validations. And that's when we're really going to see the power of our on submit and actually making sure that, okay, before we do anything, before we take some sort of information and we do anything with it, we have to make sure that, okay, it follows our parameters, it follows exactly what we want it to do. It does exactly what we need it to do before we send it to our database. Now, obviously, we don't have a database yet. So some of the power of the on submit is gonna kind of be null until we get there, or we start dealing with Postman sort of stuff. But for right now, it's just kind of what we got. So that's all I have. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Unless there's any questions, I'll stay around. Garrett will stay around. But if there's any questions, feel free. And if not, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. And I hope you had a great Halloween as well.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.